So here we are with the newest Final Fantasy in the main series, Final Fantasy 15, and I'll be looking at that PC version. So Final Fantasy 15 took a really long time to come out, like a decade, and I was pretty excited for it when it finally came out. It would go on to sell like crazy, but it also drastically changed Final Fantasy as a whole. The series would actually never be the same again after this game. So let's start with that story. The story in Final Fantasy 15 stars Noctis and his three bros, or bodyguards basically. They are all the best of friends. Noctis is a prince actually. You see, the world in Final Fantasy 15 is really unique as it has a lot of modern stuff to it, but it also has a lot of fantasy in it. One part of the fantasy being kings and queens and all that. So Noctis is a prince, and his father is the king of all the land. Noctis is going to get married to a childhood friend and bring peace between the Imperials and his people. So he goes with his three friends in their amazing car known as the Regalia, and that's pretty much all I want to say for the story. The story in the game is much more complex than that, and it has so many more layers to it. There is so much more to the story that I will not bring up because this game is still relatively new, and I think it's also really good for the story. I think this game is one of the best stories in the entire Final Fantasy franchise, and there's nothing like it in the franchise. I love the world, how it's got modern stuff and fantasy stuff. They have cell phones, cameras, cars, but then there's still monsters, kings, queens. I really like the setting, and then just the characters. The four main dudes are just splendid. They are all so well developed and create this bond that is extremely good. It can be argued that the side characters in this game are not the strongest, and to be honest, most of them aren't. But the main four are just fantastic. Their entire arc from the beginning all the way to the end, it's just really good. The story isn't perfect, and I'll get into that in a bit, but I think for the most part the story is really good, and it has a really emotional ending. I just really like the story in this game, and it's definitely the best story Final Fantasy has had in a long time. Like, we're talking maybe even like 2 decades long. It's certainly better than anything 13 had, and it's better than 12's. I just love the story. So let's talk about the gameplay now. So Final Fantasy 15 drastically changes the gameplay to Final Fantasy, like so much that it's just a totally different kind of RPG. The game has 2 parts to it, the combat and then the free roam. You play the whole game as Noctis, excluding updates to the game. Noctis can run, he can jump, he can do basic contextual movement, and can attack. He has 2 types of attacks, and I guess I'll get into the battle system now. The game has left the menus. What do I mean by this? The game uses a real-time battle system. Battles take place in real time. Attack, defend, and item are no longer menus. They're buttons on the controller. No menus, you push the attack button to attack, you hold down the defend button to defend, and you push the item button to see all your items. You see that enemy, you walk right up to that enemy, and the battle is right there. There's no separate arena or anything. When you start to get close, a meter will show up at the top of the screen showing your detection. Once detected, the battle begins. To flee, you literally just run away. In battles, the characters have HP and Noctis is MP, like other Final Fantasy games. MP comes back at a pretty decent rate as long as you aren't using MP abilities. If your characters get hurt too much, they go into danger mode. If they're in danger mode, you can either help them up or give them a potion to get them up. If they go down entirely, Phoenix Down is still needed. Even if Noctis goes down, you can still use Phoenix Down. Speaking of him, let's talk about his abilities. Noctis has 4 main abilities. He can do a standard attack, he can defend, which also works as a parry, he can use items, and he can warp. Warping is extremely important in this game. You look at an enemy, you press the warp button, and you literally teleport to them. Throw your sword forward and teleport to them, damaging them greatly. The further they are, the more damage you do. It uses MP also. Noctis will find lots of weapons throughout the game. You can equip these to the D-pad. Again, you can carry 4 at a time. You can carry 4 weapons at a time. And that includes the magic. The weapons manifest right in front of your very eyes when you equip them, which is pretty awesome. The weapons all have different speeds and levels of damage. There are a couple other attacks Noctis can do besides the standard attack. He can do a blindside attack, which is literally hitting the enemy enough times in the back. And you can break parts of the enemy depending on it if you attack certain parts enough times. Like if you attack an arm cannon on a robot, you can break the arm cannon eventually. You can even parry when the enemy attack allows it. and the game tells you when to parry, but you can turn that off. Noctis even has like a rage meter in this circle that fills up, and when it fills up, he unleashes a super attack. For 90-95% of the game, really, Noctis has his buds with him. They are AI controlled and are actually really good in battle. Their AI is pretty amazing for the most part, I'll say, and I never was really worrying about them at all. During battle, a meter called the tech bar fills up. Once it reaches a certain point, Noctis can command his bros to do a super move that combines his warping with it. You can even use multiple of these super moves at once. This is like essential to the combat and is really needed towards the end of the game. Next is how magic works in this game. You don't really use it that much. Elemency is split into ice, fire, and lightning. You have to craft your own magic charges. You can then equip these charges and use the magic. To craft the magic, you need to find the raw material for it in the world. It has a lot of use. I just didn't find myself remembering I even have it, to be honest. And I've seen people who just totally wreck stuff with the magic, but that just wasn't me. The very last part of the battle system to mention is the summons, which seems standard enough for a Final Fantasy game. However, these summons are easily, and I mean easily, the very best summons of any Final Fantasy, period. They look amazing and like, oof, they just are the best ones in existence ever. I love it. They're perfect. Oh, they're just great. So what will you be using all this on? The enemies. Yeah, the enemies, of course. That's what the battle system's for. There is a huge cast of enemies. Some are just regular soldiers, some are creatures, then actual monsters, and beasts that get really big, and then the gigantic, amazing boss. Seriously, the bosses in this game are just so mind-blowingly good. I love them all. The bosses are just great in this game. So yeah, the combat system is really different from the Final Fantasy of old. Something that isn't different is getting XP and leveling up. This is standard, really. However, there is even a twist. You don't get the XP when you receive from finishing a battle. To get the XP, you have to go to a safe haven, and then you get it all at once. It like stores up. So eating food in this game usually is a safe haven. Doing activities in the overworld and leveling up gets you ability points. These are spent on new abilities. There are like a shitload of these, and it's crazy. Some of these are as simple as do more warp damage, but others are way more complex. You won't even get probably half of these from playing through the game once, so spend wisely. Along with this, Noctis and his friends have their own skills to level up, which uses its own thing. Noctis likes to fish, Glady likes to survive, he has like survival skills, Ignis has cooking, and Prompto has pictures. Their own way to level this up is by doing their activity, which is what I mentioned. And by leveling these up, it improves your stats and your gear. These are also, though, leveled up in a different way. My favorite is Ignis because he makes the food. Whenever you stop and you set up camp, he can make food based off your resources and crafting materials that you picked up throughout the world. And you can make all different types of food, and it was really cool, and it was just fun to try to figure out how much food you could make. So yeah, that's a lot of leveling up to take in. But what else do you do in this world? So the game, for the most part, is a large open world. Like, this world is massive in the game. There are 3 types of missions to partake in the game. The storyline missions, the side missions, and the hunts. To get around the world, you have the Regalia, one of the best cars in any video game, and chocobos if needed. The Regalia can be driven 2 ways, automatically or manually. Manual is when you, the player, Noctis, drives the car. Driving is a bit weird at first, as you can't drive wherever you want. You're stuck to the roads. You're basically on a track. I wasn't a big fan of the driving, so I used auto, where Ignis drives for you. You still have to wait to get there, but you can control the camera. And once you've explored a certain location, you can just fast travel there anytime you want. The car uses gas as well, and you really don't want to run out. Happened to me once, never again. So in these towns, you go there, and there are various restaurants and inns to stay at, vendors for items and gear, the usual stuff, and people to give side missions and hunts. There is a lot, and I mean a lot of side content in this game. If you skip the side content in Final Fantasy 15, you're really missing out. I would say it's a majority of the game. Most of the game is side content. A lot of the side missions are some form of a fetch quest, but I actually think these are pretty fun for the most part. A few are tedious as hell, but for the most part that isn't the case. Then the hunts from Final Fantasy XII return, and these are the same. You get asked basically to hunt a certain monster or monsters depending on the hunt. These are fun, but I only did a few, not a ton. And that is the gameplay for Final Fantasy 15. It's a lot to take in, yes, but trust me, this game is so much fun in the open world, and I have even more to talk about the gameplay in a bit. Okay, so now it's time to talk about the presentation of Final Fantasy 15. How is it? It's like good, like really good. Like this game looks amazing and has such a high level of detail that it's really unparalleled in most modern games. I'm not even sure where to begin besides saying that I played the game on my PC on like the average graphics to get a decent frame rate, but the PS4 version pretty much looks identical to this. The game has so much detail that it's crazy, really. The character models, the world, it's all so detailed. The character models are all fantastic on like every level. They all look great, they animate fluidly, very well. No problems here. There's only praise, honestly, for this game's models, all of them. There's just so much detail. None of them are stiff, janky, nothing. I couldn't even try to find a problem. They're all smooth and great. They're just really lifelike. It's really ridiculous how good the models are in this game. The lip syncing, I thought it was phenomenal. I didn't see any problems with that one. No complaints for the models. The textures also look incredible. Everything just looks really lifelike and just really good. Like the graphics are just out of this world, honestly. And the stuff like the enemies that are literally not from our world are just, and they're just the fantasy, they just look amazing also. The graphics are wonderful. The only thing I can say is that the PC version is not the best optimized. I have a relatively great graphics card, but I'm barely able to run this game on like average. When I can run games like Witcher 3 on high or even ultra, it needs some optimization, and I don't think we're going to get it. The music in Final Fantasy 15 is just so good. I don't even know where to begin. It is all fantastic. It is just so good on so many levels. The original stuff is fantastic, and the amount of songs that they brought back from previous Final Fantasy games is astounding. There's probably over 100 tracks that are returning from previous Final Fantasy games, and these are just all amazing. Like it's just so good, and even the stuff that's original, that's just great too. You find all these tracks in the game stores, and it's just, you can listen to it all in the car. You can even listen to it when you're running around once you buy the MP3 player. It's just all great. The original music, the classic music, it's all really good. The battle theme is phenomenal. There's no question on that. And once the battles start happening, like the music's just so good. The atmospheric pieces, they're all really good. It's just superb. Final Fantasy has really just always had the best music when it comes to JRPGs, and this one, it's just up there. The boss theme in this game, really good as well. There really is no problem with the music, sound, or I just don't even know what to say. There's just no problems here really with the sound. I mean, the sound effects are great. The voice acting is just phenomenal for the most part. I just have there's no complaints, honestly, for the sound. Like, there's just nothing wrong with it, and other than the optimization for the PC, nothing wrong with the graphics either. But now, it's time to talk about the stuff I didn't like. So, the stuff I don't like about Final Fantasy 15. So really, I only have one main issue with the game, but this issue has many parts to it. The game is one of the strangest pacing issues I've ever had in any game. The game is realistic. It's 14 chapters long. Chapters are completed when you complete certain main objectives. Chapter 1 through 8 are in the main open world, so everything I previously mentioned with the side missions, the car, the hunts, it's all there. However, chapter 9 to 14, this is not the case. You actually leave the open world and never return to it again until you beat the game. It's really jarring and surprising that this happens. And no, you don't get a new open world to explore, actually. Instead, you get linear levels. While not entirely linear like corridors, although that is the case in a few chapters, these are not open worlds or even non-linear levels. Chapter 9 is you in this new city, and it's not a linear level, but there's no side missions in it at all besides taking pictures, so you can really only do the main quest, making it basically linear. The rest of the game is like this, really. Square has addressed this in updates to the game. Chapter 10 and 14 have new side missions, but these feel really phoned in. Chapter 10, 11, 12, and Chapter 13 really are not that great in the game. The final chapter of the game I thought was absolutely fantastic, though. I have zero issues there. It's just as good as Chapter 1 through 8. Chapter 9 isn't terrible, but it's not as good as chapter 1 through 8. It's good though. That said though, like the less said about chapter 10 through 12, the better, because I thought these were just kind of trash from a gameplay perspective. Like, these are super linear levels with nothing to do, and they add not that much to the game other than drag it down, I felt, honestly. Chapter 13 used to be really obnoxious, but they added the ability to play as Gladdy instead of Noctis, so it's over really quick, and it's actually kind of fun. So the beginning chapters, the beginning 8 of them to be in particular, are again just so amazing on a variety of different levels. Chapter 9, it's good, but it's not as good as the previous ones. And then chapter 10 and 11, 12, 13 are just eh. And chapter 14 is great. The final chapter is just amazing, and I would put it with chapter 1 through 8 easily in terms of quality. But it's just like, it's just weird how chapter 9 through 13 are so linear and how fast they can be finished. Like, it took me maybe 5 hours to go through chapter 9 through 13, so there isn't even that much to it. But there is, I guess. You see, while the gameplay may take a back seat and become extremely linear in these chapters, the story goes into full force. You see, after chapter 1, the story really kind of takes a pause. Sure, some stuff happens here or there, but it's basically on pause. But literally from chapter 9 onward, the story is in full force. So it's like chapter 1 through 8, you get this amazing gameplay, but not too much story. And then in chapter 9 through 13, you have this amazing story, but not too much gameplay. And it's like, it's just really lacking compared to the rest of the game. But I will say the final chapter, it has both these, so it's excellent. So that's the pacing issue with the game, and it's my main issue with the game. It's my only issue, really, with the game. And it's a decently sized issue. The only thing that makes this better is that chapter 1 through 8 is so much longer than 9 through 13. It's probably triple in terms of length. I'm serious. Assuming you do a bunch of the side missions, this pacing issue was really big back when the game came out, and a lot of people didn't like the game very much after chapter 8 because of it. While I think it is an issue, it's not that big of an issue, especially since Square's kind of addressed it. I think the game is still fantastic though, despite this. Sure, a few parts of the game leave a bit to be desired, but for the most part the game is fantastic on so many other levels that I just kind of neglect the crummier, shorter chapters of the game. And while there are worse, they are worse and on a lesser quality of gameplay, the story is the main focus here, and it is really good. So it's got that going for it. It's not all bad. This brings me to the conclusion of Final Fantasy 15, and that is that the game is great. I think it is still a wonderful game for the most part, and one I could not stop playing. I had late night sessions with the game going to 3 or 4 a.m. because this game was just so much fun. I really like all the changes to the series, and I hope the best for the series in the future. This game is really great. If you like role-playing games, and you haven't played this for some reason, you really like this one, I see no reason to not love the first 9 chapters of the game, and the last chapter. A marvelous game as a whole, with a wonderful ending that was very emotional. However, this is not the end of Final Fantasy 15. We have the DLC. There were a couple DLCs released for the game, and I'll be honest, when it comes to DLC in Square Enix, like, it's usually just crap and is overpriced as hell. Other Final Fantasies, Tomb Raider, Deus Ex being prime examples. I would not have bought any of this DLC if it wasn't included in the Windows Edition, but I have the Windows Edition, so let's look at it. There were 3 campaigns released as of this time, each an episode based on one of Noctis' 3 brothers, air quotes. Episode Gladdy, Prompto, and Ignis. Let's start with Gladdy. Gladdy's DLC has you play as him in these caves to fight off a classic Final Fantasy enemy. Playing as him is fun. I might add, he can do stuff Noctis can't. My problem isn't the story or the gameplay or presentation, it's the length. This DLC is like 35 minutes long. I'm not even kidding. Maybe 45 minutes long at most, but it's short as hell. It's decent enough. Playing as Gladdy's different. He's pretty big, pretty hefty. But that short of anything, decent or not, it drags it down a lot. There isn't even any side missions, side content, replayability, nothing. You play it once for 45 minutes at the most and you're done for good. The next is Prompto's DLC, which is like a third-person shooter. This is good too. He plays totally different. He really does play like a shooter. It's fun and different from everything. It has a serious story with Prompto. It's a little longer than the last DLC at like an hour and 5 minutes. It's under an hour and a half though, that's for sure. But it definitely is better than Gladdy's. The last DLC currently released is Ignis, which is by far the best DLC. His style of gameplay is completely different from the other two. He really just has his own where he teleports all over the place. It's cool. His DLC is like an hour and a half long, but there is actually some side stuff to do. He easily has the best DLC and best gameplay of all three of them. I really wish these DLCs weren't so damn short. It took me maybe 3.5 hours to finish all three of these DLCs. They're all good, and they all play good. It's just they're way too short, and they have this original gameplay, so it's like, why would they develop all this for such a short, for such short gameplay? Like, why? There was also a multiplayer DLC, but I didn't play this one at all. I'll just be honest, I didn't play it. I don't have anyone to play with. So, originally, while I was writing this review, that was it for all the DLC. We were done. But apparently there was a Season 2 planned for Final Fantasy 15 of DLC, but it's all been canceled, strangely enough, except for one of them, Episode Arden. All the other DLCs were canceled. I didn't even know there was more coming. I guess that's just how little I care about it, the DLC, because if this is anything to go off of, they'll probably have good gameplay. Well, they're not, because they're not coming out, except Arden. It'll probably have good gameplay, but it'll be like an hour and a half long. But I guess that's the end of Final Fantasy 15. It ends with the Arden gameplay coming out in 2019. So, yeah, I mean, the DLC, if you can get it on the Windows Edition, or the Ultimate Edition that's on PS4 and Xbox, sure, go ahead and play it. Otherwise, don't even bother with this DLC. Like, it's fun, and it's cool, but it's so short. And that concludes Final Fantasy 15. That's everything for the game as of now. So, hope you guys had a nice long review. So, have a nice day, guys.